All right. Hi everyone. Welcome back. It's the 10th session of these fireside chats that we are doing, and it's my pleasure to have Shalini with us today. Welcome, Shalini. A quick introduction. So Shalini is managing partner and CEO of Ikigai Advisory, and in fact a former CFO at Iron Mountain and Evolved by Nature. So, a seasoned professional and a leader in the space. And today we are going to again just talk about a dream AI agent for the CFO. So, Shalini, anything that you may want to get started with?
No, I'm just excited to share my insights and thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to start with a very explicit question, or essentially, I want to know where you use AI or a Gen AI's tool today. So where exact, especially from like a finance leader perspective, what are the key tools and where do you use them?
Okay, so I've used ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Cloud. Though I will say that I'm most well versed with ChatGPT. What I've learned is like ChatGPT is a very powerful tool for CFO, right? Besides like just doing the traditional like drafting reports or scenario modeling, I've used it in a lot of other areas like contract management, board, investor like prep, or business model understanding. If I want to dive and understand something, you need to be able to ask it the right questions, though. That's the caveat I will say. And so, a few cases I found them incredibly useful for, like I mentioned, the contracts management and like
Mm-hmm.
negotiation strategy piece. Like I would never replace my GC or or legal team with it, but it is a great way to initially look, get some insights on contracts and be able to build an initial proposition of how you want to attack it or how do you want to negotiate it. In the old days, and I say old days, like
Hmm.
maybe a year ago, I would have to I pretty much signed off on all the contracts for the company. I bore the liability for that, so you had to
Hmm.
sit and read every contract and spend hours and hours on it, right? Whereas
Hmm.
now it's you're able to kind of turn it around so quickly because at least you have an initial thinking document that you can use as a starting
Hmm.
point. Another one is, now in my advisory business, I'll end up speaking to a lot of different clients and I have to very quickly learn new businesses and be able to dive
Hmm.
into them. And so the company research, landscape assessment, business model understanding part, if you're
Hmm.
able to kind of ask the right questions or use the right prompts and dive into it, ChatGPT gives you a really, I'm able to learn about companies, within half a day sometimes. And it typically would take me a couple of days, right? Like go into
Hmm.
Google,
Hmm.
do the research, put it all together, then, bulletize it and summarize it. And, the tool does that for you. So I think it's a huge, huge time
Hmm.
saver, and, a productivity enhancement. And then I always, use it for a lot of generic things like, drafting, summarizing financial information or
Hmm.
drafting emails for communication, such as, monthly updates,
Hmm.
for the C-suite or starter slides for, board or investor updates. So, for me, the biggest advantage has been the time saving behind it, right? It just takes a lot of the manual work and helps you to start at a much more efficient point. So, a general rule of thumb, I would say that
Hmm.
I've found ChatGPT very useful for brainstorming, learning, building a narrative, creating starting version of drafts for communication. As long as you kind of know the right questions to ask, it really
Hmm.
can reach, it has huge potential. Perplexity is usually good for deep research or, if you want
Hmm.
actual facts or actual data. And then Cloud I've used mainly for, reasoning or decision support. Like, if I want to deep dive into a
Hmm.
specific topic like accounting treatment or financial policy, there it's been really useful. So, that's kind of, that summarizes where I use it. But I'll tell you, I use it every day because it's been incredibly helpful.
Got it. So I'm hearing actually two things. One is these tools are extremely powerful and can help a CFO. But more importantly, while you were speaking, I realized that it's kind of your daily realities of a CFO are like all kinds of things. It's not just balance sheets. It's,
True.
um, Yeah, so baby, I think that's something I want to like. Let's spend some time on that, and as we get started, maybe just tell us how wide the kind of thing CFO is. Can you just maybe walk me through what your typical week looks like? What are the things that you do every day, or maybe I know there's a calendar every month, or all of those things. So, what is what are the key things that you would be doing on a daily basis?
That's a loaded question. Okay, so I mean, okay, I guess on any given week, right, I could be doing anything from, reviewing cash runway or investment policy compliance to negotiating contracts or vendor terms, managing audits, preparing board, information, or leading like a cross-functional planning session, with
Mm,
sales, operations, R&D, and all this is. But this is besides like the one-off tasks like you'll end up having to do like 409
mm,
evaluation or writing a revenue policy or coming up with a BCP or the fundraising work that you do,
mm,
evaluating vendors, and that's on top of the traditional finance layer, right? Which is reporting, forecasting,
mm,
variance analysis, etc. And you did say, right, that that's very true that we typically tend to have a rhythm or a calendar, right? So
mm,
if I was to kind of summarize it from a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, I would say, daily, the things I would get hit with would be, reviewing a cash or a bank balance because I want to validate the
mm,
investment policy or an urgent investor or a board email that I need to get back to instantly or
mm,
approving like a vendor payment or a contract, right? That's a kind of a daily thing. A weekly thing would be more around, um, you know,
mm,
outcomes of forecast reviews, like meeting budget owners or finalizing a payroll or meeting with my CEO, for some headcount
mhm,
decisions, things like that. A monthly thing is usually driven by the close calendar, right? Journal entries, reconciliations, variance analysis,
mm,
preparing a deck to kind of communicate to the board and to my C-suite team, audit follow-up sometimes, or KPI tracking things. That's typically monthly, and then quarterly is usually around investor and board reporting, right? So
mm,
we have a quarterly like board meeting. Most SMEs will have that kind of rhythm, and so a lot of time is spent, just making sure you've tightened your forecast, updated all your like cash flow and runway projection scenarios, and then just building that deck, reporting it, communicating it to your investors, preparing for your audit committee meeting, things like that. So I think that's how I would summarize, you know, the rhythm that we as CFOs will face.
mm.
And of course, like I told you, there's a lot of ad hoc stuff that goes on. So it's quite a juggling act.
Got it. And do you so do you actually end up making those slides? So let's say if there's an investor report coming in and you have to be a part of what you're reporting up. So would you as a CFO end up making slides, or there are people or teams that do that? So
So it
so
would, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, my team would help. So the thing is, like my team would help as in they would kind of pull the data. I mean, they have to do
Mm,
the entire updating, the forecasting piece, the scenarios, etc. Right? So they would pull all that, have the latest data, and I would kind of I mean, initially when you come into a new company, you have to kind of set up that board deck and everything, but then you kind of
mm,
reuse it. So then they would just kind of update it, and then that's when I kind of sit with them, validate everything, make sure things look right, kind of understand how we want to communicate the story and the narrative, because that's the initial cut that I do with my team. Then I'll do it with my CEO and COO, and then we build the whole story of how do we want to communicate to the board and what are the things we want to focus on, for this quarter, et cetera, et cetera. So that's typically how it's done. But I think as a CFO, you'll end up kind of orchestrating the whole thing, right? Because you kind of have to make sure the tasks get done on time. You have to have a calendar to get it done so that you're prepared and have enough time so you don't go into a board discussion just after like some, like we have a calendar. We make sure the board gets the slides at least 2 days before the discussion, so they have the time to absorb it as well. So things like that. I do think the CFOs play a big role in kind of making sure that whole flow goes smoothly and seamlessly, so there's no surprises or you're not kind of walking in blind into any situations.
got it. So it's I think you use the word orchestrating. So it's more like ensuring this whole thing works in a rhythm rather than just ensuring the books are in place. So,
That's true.
rather, in addition to ensuring that the
Yes,
books are,
you have to make
there's
sure the
a,
books are clean and the financials are
yeah,
clean and everything makes sense and the story holds
yeah,
and there's no mistakes, all that's kind of the status quo, right? That's like the the base expectation, but you do have to kind of also manage that entire movie script, if you can call it that.
yeah. Do you kind of see key use cases or pain points where you would really want AI to help in these kind of cases?
Oh, I mean, I can think of tons of them, right? So maybe we can start walking through them one by one, and please stop me if you have questions, as I'm
Absolutely.
talking to it. But
Yeah.
but let's start with the first, most basic one, right? Which is like financial planning,
Mhm.
budgeting, forecasting, right? That's the budget piece, right? That's always like usually it's like a 3-month marathon, right? You're kind of
Mm,
gathering inputs from every function, you're reconciling assumptions, you're building templates, you have to hold like budget meetings, so,
mm,
functionally as well as these all day meetings with with your CEO, CO to kind of bring them up to speed. You have to revise, you have to create decks, you have to revise decks for the board to communicate.
mm,
So, I mean that's one area where I can see like a AI agent or AI capability helping dramatically, right? Because there's a lot of
mm,
time spent in this whole planning process itself. So, if you could have AI generate like budget templates, from prior years, look at the previous year and create a shareable Google template or whatever it might be, that would be huge. That would save my analysts so much time,
mm,
scheduling and coordinating these meetings because guess, today it's done manually, right? Someone from your team has to do it. And
mm,
that's not really huge manual value add work, right? It's more administrative.
mm, mm,
It can also, once you have the initial budget, rolled in based on inputs from
mm,
from the different teams, you could use it to identify like, outlier spends or headcount changes or things that, dramatically immediately stand out. So you can start investigating what's the cause for that and talk to the right people to kind of understand the drivers of that. And then,
mm,
obviously the presentation side, the initial draft of the board presentation slides, what are the key drivers? What are the assumptions? What is it looking like? What's the initial view of the budget? AI could help create a starting draft, and that would save tons of time because today it's, I'll talk to my controller and my financial analyst and tell them, here's how I want this presentation to look. And
mm.
they'll spend probably 2 days or 3 days creating that because, they have to kind of wean all the data, put it together in PowerPoint. But, AI could probably do it for you in like 5 minutes, right? So it could save weeks of time if we could leverage it for some of these budget tasks.
Got it. So essentially planning, forecasting, recreating templates that probably have happened in the past, things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And even on the monthly variance and forecasting
mm,
process, right? I mean, there's today, in most finance teams, your analysts will spend time doing the variance analysis, comparing
mm,
actuals with the forecast, figuring out what the key drivers are, and it's all done in kind of, with your systems and using Excel. But with AI, you can automate that piece. You can save them days of manual updates because you could use this learning to kind of auto refresh your forecast, right? You could say today it's all done manually. You
mm,
can again help it to create the story in the sense, what are the insights, right? Because we usually have a monthly review with the cross-functional leaders because we want them
mm,
to know how they're doing versus the forecast that we had, and what are the drivers and if things need to be changed. And that again, to tell that story we have to create a deck. We do that. AI could pull that together really quick and give us an initial draft and save us
mm,
time. If you take it to the next level, you could also kind of push these insights into Slack or Teams if if
mhm,
companies use that, and that way you can do cross-functional alignment much quickly versus you might not even need to have these meetings. You could just have them, done through these updates, and only meet if it's needed. We all deal with too many meetings as is. So, these are typically days and days of work, right? But it can be turned around much faster if you had, AI capability to help with all of these tasks.
got it. Yeah. And so there is one thing that you actually talked about quite a bit early on was cash flow. And in fact, through all the fireside chats that we have done so far, the one thing every CFO seems to like is cash flow. So Why? Like, why is that the case?
I mean,
Why is it so important?
cash is survival, right? I mean, especially in startups and especially in biotech, like, where I've been in the biotech space and,
Mm,
the burn is really high. So, you know, every CFO tracks it like obsessively, because yeah, you can't afford not to know your cash position, right? I mean, like,
mm,
I run weekly and monthly cash models with multiple scenarios, right? Because you constantly want to have know, like, what happens if something goes wrong, right? What if my collections
mm,
drop by 20%, or what if my sales double, or what if a big PO slips this month? Like, what's my runway,
mm,
what's the impact? Because you don't want to be in a position where, your cash position is is a dangerous place, right? So, even out here, all like we typically, in the companies that I work with, we've built like a cash model and we do these simulations.
mm,
Again, this is usually like I lock myself up with my FP&A guy in a room, and we'll run these, we'll understand them, we'll figure out how do we present this to our CEO, and sometimes our COO if needed, and because we have to kind of figure out where we are, communicate it, and then figure out the follow-up action items from it, right? Because in some cases there is measures you have to take to either stop some spend, or build strategies to kind of ensure that your runway is extended
mm,
as much as possible. You're in a startup, so this kind of work would take, it takes a fairly long amount of time, right? Because you have to kind of update your financials, and you have to update all your models, you have to kind of play around with all the change in assumptions and scenarios, and you can't be dynamic about it because it's still an Excel model, but an AI agent can automatically like update these. It could simulate scenarios in real time. It can alert us when burn rates or assumptions deviate, and it can do it as it happens. You don't have to wait for month end. Now we can have like a
mm.
living self-updating model instead of a static Excel, right? I mean, it's every CFO and every CEO's like dream to be able to do that. I mean, in fact, I know in my last company, my CEO would always say, "Why can't this be more dynamic? Why can't like why can't like?" He wanted these answers like on the fly, but it wasn't so easy for us because you had to go do the work behind it to come up with here's what the situation's looking like.
Got it. Yeah, I think I can see why the obsession is essentially survival depends on the money. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Okay. So this is about. So there are two parts to cash, right? So one is definitely the spend side of things. So what is your take on like maybe bringing an AI agent, which is perfect agent for spend management or spend control, or thoughts around that, like spend management, maybe obviously P2P or to C, both within the realm, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of my peers and I've spoken to a lot of companies, in my current role too, right? I think spend management, the P2P or O2C, areas and I think there's a huge ability for AI to help, right? I mean, let's talk about the spend
Hmm.
management, the P2P first, right? Um, it's, you know, you there's so much manual work that happens, right? It's like the purchase orders, the approvals, the vendor invoices, contract, all that is done kind of manually, right? In smaller companies, usually people will use QBO, QuickBooks Online or Zero, but they're still very painfully manual. Like, those are the biggest peeves my team will complain about when, that's the work they don't want to do, right? Like a smart agent could do a lot of things to kind of take away that manual piece of the work, right? Like you can
Hmm.
connect your QBO to either your ERP to like via API to like to your banks directly, and all that reconciliation piece becomes so much easier. You can
Hmm.
classify spend automatically, like flag duplicates, policy violations, and there's so many like bolt-ons today for which can help with like the spend management, like so
Hmm.
just to give you an example, right? I've done this with my client companies as well as in my previous companies. Like we were able to bring in tools like Ramp, which drastically helped with the whole spend management piece, and
Hmm.
it made things so simple because once you do all the mapping and set the tool up, it
Hmm.
really kind of is is very automatic. And we saw that with RAM for spend management. We saw that with like Hyperbots and Tipalti for like AP automation, right? Because based on the company
Hmm.
size, you need to pick the right tool. But it can really like simplify, take away all the manual work, and be able to give you automate it in a way that you can, your team is not doing all the crunching work, but actually looking at the outputs and kind of validating and making sure things are right, and moving on. And the biggest value add for me was the monthly close timing, right? Like
Hmm.
I've seen it reduce close timing by like 40-50%, by using these technologies and like automating your CFO stack. Like in my last company, we built API interfaces with our banking.
Hmm.
We use ramp, we use bill.com, and we we were able to really bring down our close time by half, and we were still very manual in our processes. So I mean, I think if you use more elite AP
Hmm.
automation tools like Hyperbots or Tripalti, I think there's even more opportunity to kind of really like take away the manual stuff. That's a huge time sink. And sometimes there's the trust factor of, hey, do you want to like turn everything over to like an agentic AI or these AI agents? But the process I use with companies' advice is, let's do a phased approach, right? Let's start with um, we just do, I don't know, 10% automated, and we validate it, because it's also a good way for your organization to build trust that the tool can do the right thing. And then you gradually, maybe over a
Hmm.
year's time, you know, start doing more and more, till you're convinced that, okay, it works. The tool does exactly the same thing my controller or my, someone in my team would do. And, it's just helping us, free up time to do more insightful and more like value add work. So I found it to be a huge help in freeing up, my finance resources time to, and you reuse them or repurpose them for more strategic and like value add tasks, because there's a ton to do. There's so much more to do, and I feel like this is the low hanging fruit we can go after. Um,
Yeah. So that's, I mean, you're right. So there is this AI or agents or agentic AI is great at doing things that are manual repetitive tasks, right? So and these use cases fall pretty much right in the realm of things. But let's say if I look at the opposite part, right? So you've talked about spend. Let's say revenue recognition. On
mhm,
that side, where is it that you can see? So one piece is, yes, find those invoices, make sure they are paid, track them, all of those things. But and I'm not saying that's easy to do. I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's critical. But it's kind of a large set of manual tasks. We can imagine AI learning it and doing it if done well, right?
mhm.
So what are the kind of tasks that you see, like maybe a virtual team member do beyond just helping you track payments, or helping you with, let's say, draft and maybe even send emails. So I'm saying, okay, there's an agent which can do all of this already. Is it something beyond these repetitive tasks that you can think of where I really need the agent like AI to do ABC? What are those kind of hard use cases in maybe revenue recognition to start with, and then other parts too?
Yeah, I mean, for revenue recognition, I've worked with companies where, a lot of like tech SaaS and, product
Hmm.
SaaS kind of models, right? It's a lot of
Hmm.
work in Excel today, right? Because you
Hmm.
have to correctly interpret your ASC 606, like revenue policy, make sure that you're booking the right revenue, every month and every quarter. And, if you don't have some kind of AI capability or a tool to help you, then you're essentially doing all this in Excel. So it's actually days and days of work, and it's very tedious because the systems also don't talk to each other, right? Your CRM doesn't necessarily talk to
Hmm.
your ERP, and so you're dumping reports from everywhere. You're validating, then you're assimilating it in an Excel sheet. Then you're manually looking through every customer and validating versus across your invoices and
Hmm.
collections, and interpreting what's the right rev rec number, what's the deferred revenue, like because you need to, from a revenue forecasting perspective, you need to do that.
Hmm.
So this whole booking to billing to revenue forecast process, right? It's a very manual thing, and it's tedious, it's error
Hmm.
prone. And, like I said, it involves a lot of systems, your ERP, your CRM, your billing tools.
Hmm.
And many a times, unfortunately, they don't talk to each other. So, leveraging these AI capabilities would be huge. And now there's a lot of tools like Tabs and RightRev and Zora. I'm actually testing some of them, which can easily bolt onto your existing
Hmm.
ERP or QBO and, really take away all the manual handling and ensure, like, accurate and compliant, like, revenue reporting, right? And it can
Hmm.
also help with the collections piece, right? Like, pulling up like open invoices and predicting, who your
Hmm.
late payers are, right? Because there is a strategy behind how you want to go after your whole collection strategy too. Like, it can draft collection mails. So I think it would be a huge time saver on the RevRec side, and especially companies that have, these SaaS subscription models would benefit hugely from it.
Got it. Yeah. So essentially we want um, kind of it to simulate things or plan and
Yeah.
simulate and work out scenarios and things like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
give us a first cut at, like, hey, what is the right revenue forecast? And, even if it sets up the piece for, sets it up for us, you can have, sit with the analyst, look through it, make sure it's doing the right thing, make sure you catch
hmm.
any errors if there are. And, that initial setup piece of simulating, doing it and creating that output to
Hmm.
analyze, the tool can take care of it. And then finance can do what finance is good at, analyzing.
Makes sense. Uh, all right. What else? Okay, now I think we have talked about cash coming in and it both going out and coming in. So, okay, so I think the way I see it, there is also another critical piece, right, where there is compliance. So where do you see, like, what are your key pain points around maybe audit, compliance, all of that, and then obviously where do you see the role of your fancy AI agent over there?
Yeah, so I mean, audit risk compliance, right? These are like, I mean, usually they fall under the CFO's responsibilities, and
Yeah.
they're often thankless, but they're very critical, right? That's where you
Hmm.
can't slip. And audit prep is a real grind, right? Especially in smaller companies, like, sub 25 million. Like, there's not a lot of
Hmm.
processes to collect the evidence, track
Hmm.
your PBC lists, do the follow-ups with the department, have they don't even have repositories sometimes, like, that's
Hmm.
very common. And so I think what AI could do is, build this audit repository and always
Hmm.
kind of maintain it in a way that it's always ready and updated, right? Because I think that's key, right? That's where the slip happens, where certain things don't get updated, and then you're in the middle of your audit and you don't have the supporting documentation or the right invoices or what have you to, that's where usually those are the bottlenecks. It can also, like, tag files to the right controls. From a compliance perspective, it can auto alert. If you create a list of documents that, that needs to watch out for, it can auto alert if something's
Hmm.
off or if a compliance document is missing. Investment policies is another one I can think of, right? I mean, those are becoming after the whole SVB debacle, like,
Hmm.
companies are very, very stringent on that. All boards want you to have an investment policy and you have to follow it, and they really mandate it. And you know that's manual work. Your controller has to go in every day, check your bank balances, make sure there's, you have that 60-40 split or whatever it is that you promised. And you know an AI tool could easily just flag that for you every day and tell you exactly where it is. Are you compliant, are you not, send you a report, send whoever wants a report. So you're kind of covered for that, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of these small recurring things that tend to absorb a lot of bandwidth, but they're perfect candidates for automation, in this compliance, risk, and audit space.
Do is this kind one is this kind of something that is usually outsourced or handed over to an external firm, like audits and things like that, or several maybe small organizations still retain it as an in-house process? Like, in your experience, at what point is it, let's say, some big four will take it over or things like that?
I think the bigger companies, I mean, so when I was at Iron Mountain and P&G, like I didn't deal with this. I only dealt with this in like, the startups I worked with, right? Because the bigger companies, you're right, do tend to like outsource that. And,
Hmm.
usually like I'm brought, I used to sign off on the SEC documents at North, for
Hmm.
Iron Mountain because I was responsible for the Americas. But, I would have this big team of experts who had already done all this work and they were reviewing it with me and I was asking all the right
Got
questions
it.
to be
Yeah.
convinced to sign off, right? But in small companies, like, in the startups, typically like you don't have the dollars to like hire someone to do this for you, so you kind of have to manage it. That's why I think the biggest value is in the SME space, in the 5 million
Yeah.
to like 50 million space maybe, because there typically it's usually a very small lean finance team that's managing this along with everything else.
Got it. Yeah. And I think another thing I hear while you're speaking is even for bigger firms, the review is still in-house, right? Review, red flagging,
Yeah, yes. Hmm.
approvals, all of that is in-house. And I'm guessing assistance in doing that is useful. And it's like while audit side things are maybe can be more structured, I'm sure these kind of maybe writing, reading, summarizing, finding what is broken, what else
Hmm.
needs to be added is more like a right in the middle of your contract and vendor negotiations. I think, and that's something I do know you are both passionate about and something that you have spent a lot of your your time on, right? Pre GPT, post GPT, all the time. It's I'm sure you have spent a lot of time on it. So what do you see as the key thing to crack over there? Like, what is it
Yeah.
that we need to solve?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this. That's my favorite use case, right? The whole, not just the contract management piece that I
Yeah.
talked about earlier, but also vendor negotiations, right? Because the thing about, it's usually like, these can be pages and pages, right? Like the contract, vendor contracts, can be like, anywhere from 5 to like, I don't know, 25 pages. And,
Hmm.
AI agents can easily scan them, summarize them, point out the risky
Hmm.
clauses, suggest negotiation levers. I would say it's easily cut my review time by like maybe 70-75%, right? And
Hmm.
again, I would never replace it. Like, I'm not going to take that and, run with it. I'll obviously, involve my legal team, but it's a great tool to just speed up the process time on the reviewing part and the strengthening the contract part. And,
Hmm.
AI also has the ability to kind of, like from a vendor negotiations point, right? You can extract like key terms, risk exposure, renewal alerts. I mean,
Hmm.
that's all that is, again, you have to either create a system or have a contract management system to manage it, which again, a lot of companies don't necessarily have in place. So I think it lands up become very very manual, right? Because usually a lot of companies will have just an Excel sheet with all their vendors and all these
Hmm.
terms put in, but if you don't have a system in place, I mean, typically we'll have like a quarterly, or we'll have someone assigned to go verify, look at it and come up with tasks that need to be followed up. But this can very easily be done through an AI
Hmm.
agent, versus doing it manually, right? And in some small companies, it's even non-existent. I mean, not because of lack of awareness. They know they need to do it, but more because of lack of bandwidth, because you might just not have the resources and you're like, so that becomes a neglected area then, if you don't have the ability to kind of review it on a regular basis and go negotiate your contracts to you know
Hmm.
to drive more value for your company.
Would you want your AI agent to do the negotiation on your part?
No, never. I find I pride myself on my negotiation skills. So no, but I'm more than happy to use the help on the levers and the brainstorming, because I really do think. I mean, it's honestly helped me like come up with. I feel like I've negotiated much better contracts, because of being able to, you know, get that input. Because yes, experience gives you some, but then sometimes you're not thinking or you're not aware of everything, and
Hmm.
you might discuss it with your GC, and but if from a learning perspective,
Hmm.
you know everything that's possible, it can, it's like the world is your oyster, way of thinking. I feel like these tools will at least spit that out, and and then you use your judgment, and you take what makes sense, and at least you can kind of go forth and like what the boundaries are of the negotiation. But I feel it's a huge enabler.
Got it. And so all of this, let's say all of this is enabled, and what I'm guessing the only way of measuring it is going to be your KPIs, right? So it's like, okay, I got negotiations right, or I managed, let's say, cash better. I did help with some email drafts. All of those things are fine, but especially from a CFO perspective, I believe we cannot really quantify the use of any of this if I don't know what KPI and which KPI and how do I track them. So where do you see, like, with experience, I'm sure each CFO knows this company, this KPI, this industry, this KPI, all of those things, right? So where do you see AI play a role in ensuring that you are looking at the right KPIs? So,
Yeah, I mean, you're very right about the KPI piece, right? Because the KPIs that, and I'm a huge believer that I think you don't need more than 3 to 5 KPIs, for your
hmm,
company. But those 3 to 5 are very important because they kind of help drive action and change,
hmm,
where it matters, right? Because if something, KPIs differ by industry, right? It can be like ARR, CAC, LTV for SaaS companies, or throughput or OEE for manufacturing companies. And sometimes, like if you're coming up with a new business model, for example, I mean, an AI agent can actually recommend and visualize the right KPIs for your business model, because
hmm,
you might, or or maybe you're in a new industry, and it can help you kind of, it almost empowers the CPO, right? Because it kind of,
hmm,
you're not trying to look through all these things and figure out, okay, what matters most, right? It has that intelligence to kind of go look at all your reporting, look at your outputs, and then say, okay, you know what? I think these three are the biggest drivers for your business, and so you need to make sure, you use these as, you know, as a part of the storytelling for the rest of the team to kind of drive the right
hmm,
action in the right direction so that you can meet your results for the year or your goals for the year.
hmm.
So
Got it. Yeah.
I feel like that's where I found it useful. And again, when I look at new businesses,
Hmm,
that's a part of the story, right? You need to understand, like, okay, hey, if I want to drive the right action within this new organization that I'm working with, like,
hmm.
what do I use that is meaningful enough for them to, want to work with me on this.
Yeah, actually, a curiosity question while you're talking about it. See, all the while we have been talking about internal looking measurement from a CFO's perspective. Where do you, in the sense, internal to the organization or whatever, against audit or some rules and compliances and all of that, where do you see external or macro moments playing a role? Because um, some of these KPIs may get impacted, or some competitors improved KPI may impact an organization. How do you see that come into play, and how do you actually deal with it today? Like, do you have some RSS feeds on your whatever phone or laptop which keep giving you alerts, or a team that helps tell you that this is what is happening outside, or there is a new thing called tariffs that came up? Like, how was where does that kind of external environment come into play here?
That's a great question. And, I think especially in today's environment where there's things changing so quickly, and, which can impact, like you thought these were your numbers for Q4, and, maybe
Hmm,
one decision that's being made in a
hmm,
macroeconomic level could like completely like turn that around. I think it would be very helpful to kind of have some kind of dashboard, which, you
hmm,
pick what those 4 or 5 criteria are, right? For you, it might be oil prices, it might be tariffs, it might be, any key underlying driver that impacts your business. It could be transportation, logistics, there's a whole, depending on what your business is, what your key drivers are. But I think it would be great to have a dashboard. And I think AI could generate this very easily,
hmm,
like a dashboard which tracks, right? What are these key drivers? And what does it do, like, if this changed by, like, I don't know, 5 or 10%,
hmm,
either ways, in either direction, what would that do to my key, measures, right? Like, yeah, my revenue, my profit. There's some key things we look at, like gross margin, net margin, things like that.
hmm,
So I think that would be an amazing um, tool for a CFO and a C-suite, like, the CFO, CEO, COO, to keep, be on top of real time. Like, hey, if something changes, if an underlying driver changes for my
Mm,
business, here's what it could do to my results for this quarter or for this year. And so I think it also then enables immediate action, right? Like, because
mm,
I think today we are still very much in this world of month-end close happens, then you know what's happened, then you go do something
mm,
about it. Whereas having something like that would make it more real time, right? You would actually be in a position where if something drastic happens, you immediately know and you can go game plan. How do I
mm,
address the situation? What do I do? What do I need to change? Do I need to do something? Do I need to just watch and wait? I mean, those are decisions you take as a leadership team. But,
mm.
I think it would be an excellent add to the dream AI agent solution you're coming up with.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's that's a very powerful statement. In the sense, yeah, it's a it's a very nice goal to have for us or anyone building one such agent, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
you could ask a CFO, right? Like, tell me what are your underlying drivers? And you can ask them for the inputs because most CFOs know their business inside out, right? So they know what are the things they're tracking and what's going to have that impact that could kind of change or drive any kind of issues on the goals result side. So everyone could kind of customize it for their needs.
yeah, and I think all of that again is part of two things, right? Your financing and investor side of things as well, right? So it's not like lot of the reporting out that a CFO does, in addition to obviously the customer plus the business, but whatever is directly related to um, investment coming into the organization. So what's your take on those use cases, and what are your key kind of pain points there, or most tedious thing there?
I think from an investor relations piece of it, right? I mean, mostly
Hmm.
that's the communication piece. And I think that is, usually you just communicate on a quarterly basis. Now, if something drastic were to happen, you probably would have to do it more real time. But on
Hmm.
the financing side, I definitely see like I think there's places where AI could help, right? And I'm talking more on like, you know, if there's a lot of times you need to like land up doing fundraising and either whether it's debt or equity fundraising, and there's many tasks associated with it, right? You have to compare banks, compare lenders, you have to evaluate terms, you have to provide, and every time you have a conversation with anyone who's talking to you about financing, you need to create a data room and due diligence folders, and you have to have you have to put together a lot of data that they can use to vet your company and start the discussions, right? So um if even before if someone's going into a financing, if they're looking into any kind of financing, even before you go in there, of course, relationships play a big role on that side, but AI could kind of also help you like actually shortlist what are the best financing options for a company that's at your particular stage, has your risk profile, and kind of start creating those due diligence folders or even summarized term sheets. I mean, that will free up the CFO more to have the
Hmm.
conversations, focus on the strategy piece, build the relationship, be able to kind of sell the value proposition and, spend time more on places where they can kind of have the most impact versus chasing your team to like, hey, did you send out that, did you make sure, did you send, is the data room up, is did you send the
Hmm.
guy the
Hmm.
information, like, there's a lot of follow-up that happens in those when you're in these financing discussions. Again, administrative, right? But it has to be done, like, and unless it's taken care of in time, it also reflects badly on the company, right? So you want to kind of be on top of those things.
Hmm.
um so if all that administrative stuff could be taken care of
Hmm.
by AI, then it frees up, I think, CFOs to do the relationship side of things, which that's what it
Hmm.
ultimately helps in someone saying yes or no to a financing decision, right?
Hmm.
Um, So I feel like that's one. I mean, there's also the cap table. There's a lot
Hmm.
of, especially small companies, they have very complicated cap tables. I mean, I've been through a cap table, like, transition in tools between cap tables is the worst nightmare you can ever live through, right? And it was, again, you have to make sure when you transition between tools, your cap table has to be right in the new tool. And you
Hmm.
know it was me and my controller sitting for hours and validating everything, but an AI tool could easily like compare and say, yes, you've got, here's things that are wrong, right? So I think
Yeah.
um simple things like that, which we we just kind of take it as,
Yeah.
okay, that's a part of being in finance. Like, I feel there's opportunity to kind of just leverage technology to ease our troubles on those side of things.
Yeah. So basically, especially in growth or organizations that are going through changes, it may be acquisition, mergers, splits, growth,
Hmm.
whatever. Migration of data from one tool to another, and here obviously I'm talking not just ERPs, right, but ERP included. That
Hmm.
that may be a very strong kind of agentic AI
Yes.
use case because
Hmm.
I need to map, right? I need to map at the speed that everything else is moving, and that speed is erratic or is not something that organization has seen earlier. So it's I think
Yeah.
it's very powerful as a use case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually helping a
Yeah.
company right now with they had their whole NetSuite integration go like completely
Hmm.
awry, and they're in a really bad situation where systems are not talking to each other. They're not able to get their historic data in, and I
Yeah.
mean, having an AI tool, even working with you, not taking over it,
Hmm.
like, I think it would be such a huge enabler, right? Because it's a lot more difficult to do these things
Hmm.
manually, just because there's so much data, and it's very easy
Hmm.
to miss something, right? So it can
Hmm.
you might make errors and miss something, whereas a
Hmm.
machine usually doesn't make errors in these kind of data intensive kind of
Hmm.
situations. So I think
Got
it's
it. Yeah.
it's great to kind of help, you know
Yeah.
just from a process flow point of view, and then you take it over, own it, and run with it. But it takes away the grunt work
Yes,
and
and
the
there's
error flow.
also yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so while we've been talking about all this cool AI stuff helping the CFO, there's a fact that I have kind of accepted with time that CFOs are conservative. Um, and that's the nicest way I'll put it. So there are a bunch of CFOs very very similar to you who will say we will embrace AI agents, but we need to ensure blah 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 blah. There's a bunch who will say that for me I am not yet convinced. How do I adopt these things, right? So like I'm clubbing a few topics here, but let's say such agents are built. What are the guardrails it will take for technologies? What are the guardrails it will take from packaging or like communication perspective to ensure CFOs or finance leaders are comfortable using these tools and those guardrails or rather those personality features for the AI agent have to exist, otherwise it doesn't make sense, right? So like what do these agents definitely need to have for adoption? How do you see that adoption happening? Are you seeing a cultural shift? Like where do you see all of this going, and how do you ensure people use it?
I think I'm definitely seeing the culture shift. Like, I mean, if I compare conversations I had maybe like a year, even a year, just a
Mm,
year ago versus, maybe like 2 months, 3 months ago, right? I feel the trust factor has changed to the extent that, like, I would see a lot more like you mentioned, right? Like, CFOs are like very conservative, and they would be like, oh, I'm not going to trust, an AI tool or even like automation to like, take care of all this. Like, I need to do this. My team needs to do this. What if they make a mistake? What if, it all blows up in my face, right? I feel now people are willing to you know at least take a look, give it a try, right? Take a look at it. And I think some of these approaches that we've tried of, let's do a phased, let's evaluate the tool, let's look, let's validate the work it's doing and be convinced that it's doing it right before we can, use it at a much broader level. I think those tactics are definitely working. And I think a lot of CFOs now do want to look at finding the right automation to kind of help reduce manual tasks, especially like I said, those three areas: spend management, P2P, and O2C. I see a lot more CFOs being open to that. I think the struggle for them is the manpower and the bandwidth to do it, right? Because usually a lot of the smaller companies will have very, very lean finance teams. And I mean, I know I struggle with it, right? I was constantly telling my folks, "Oh, we need to try this RevRec tool," because you'd see all this information. It's a very crowded place, right? So
Hmm.
you do need, you almost need, that's why you can even leverage AI, right? You can actually
Hmm.
leverage it to say, here, here's my company, here's my business model, here's some of the things that I struggle with. From, tell it about your workflows and have it like actually, you know, provide you. It's almost like a CFO automation advisor, right? Like,
Hmm.
here's tools you can evaluate that can integrate with your existing infrastructure. Here's the pricing, here's the feature fit, here's API readiness, here's how much you can, we believe it can save in ROI or in error reduction. It can help you create like an
Hmm.
implementation roadmap. There's you know there's a lot of opportunity on that front. But and of course you can talk to like um, people who are well versed with this, and can help you implement the strategy. But I've definitely seen the culture shift where a lot of CFOs are now open to wanting to like look at their tech stack, evaluate it, see what the
Hmm.
gaps are, and especially use automation AI where the low hanging fruit is and where there's intense manual work, which kind of sucks up a lot of time from their teams. Now, whether they have the money to invest in it is a whole different question. So I think that's the current macroeconomic situation also is, I think, making there's a lot of uncertainty. So I see a lot of them also being on hold and saying, "Oh, you know
Hmm.
what? I'm ready to do this, but I need a little more time." So, you know, my job is to just keep talking to them till they agree to do it.
Got it. And I think there's also this play that if AI can help CFO strategize more than just put processes in place, CFOs will be happier with the AI. Like it's beyond automation now.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I honestly, it's freeing up the CFO to think, right? To model scenarios, to explore new markets, to, manage your investors or think about stuff. I mean, it's just taking off. I mean, think about it, right? There
Hmm.
is a lot of time you spend in drafting emails and verifying, making sure things get done, and all that time that's given back to you. I mean, you can really help this CFO focus on like, value creation, not on like, task completion or data
Hmm.
collection or, you know, um, I mean, it was the old way of doing things, but I think there is a new way where you can leverage all
Hmm.
this technology that's available to us to kind of free up
Hmm.
your time and use it for something that will really, really drive a shift for the company
Hmm.
and drive right
Got it.
decision making, right? I mean, there's a lot of times you kind of know there's things you need to do, but you don't, you're drowning. CFOs now are taking over, like, I mean, I've joined companies as CFO, and then in 3 months I have HR and I have IT under me, and
Hmm.
not a lot many people added. And then you're suddenly like, you're managing like half the company, but you don't, then you kind of, it takes away bandwidth from you, right? So
Hmm.
and that's becoming increasingly common. So I think being able to see and recognize that there is something out there that can help you save time and bandwidth is a very it's a very like liberating thought and a very liberating opportunity, I think, for all of us.
Yeah. Absolutely. And actually with that thought, we are almost at the top. We have a few more minutes before we close. So maybe if I were to force you to describe your dream AI agent in one line, what would that be?
I would say, a co-pilot that's proactive, trusted, something that is able to connect my systems,
Hmm.
um, help me prioritize my day better, help me make better, faster decisions. That would be a dream AI agent for me. And ideally, it would do all this before the board meeting, not after. So, that way, my stress levels would be down, 50%.
Yeah. So everything is, you want this agent to imagine your calendar and fix things before they are on it. So that's fair enough. So that's actually what we are trying to build. But yes, something that builds combines human judgment and intelligent automation. So essentially, a CFO workspace is something that we are
Mhm.
trying to build, and it should be out there soon. But thanks, Shalini, for all the insights across all these functions. So that's like very useful, both as a builder and also as someone who is trying to understand a CFO or a finance leader's like pain points and tasks. So and that kind of that view from a CFO perspective really helps, because just reading about these things online versus hearing from you is much different. So it helps us nail down the use cases we should track, or we should ensure work well for the agents that we build for the CFO. So thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Niti. It was a pleasure, and thank you to our listeners too. I'm more than happy to chat if anyone wants to reach out or has more questions or would like to dive into anything deeper. But this has been great, and it's been great working with you and your team as well, Niti, to bring your vision of this CFO co-pilot to life. Because I honestly think it's going to be a huge enabler for CFOs, and help free up a lot of their bandwidth and help them focus on the right things. So it's continue doing the good work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.